We are continuing to work in the Java-01 working with data repository for this video. So if you need a reminder on how to get that video or get that repo, you can go back and look at the Java printing data video for a refresher. So in the last video, we looked at printing by sending just raw data to the println function, whether it was some text as a string or an int like 2 or a double real number like -0.1 or a boolean like true, or just a single character like the $sign. And so that's one way to print data, but it's pretty limiting because, maybe you want to save some data at the beginning of your program, do some things with your data, and then at the end of the program, print it. And so the mechanism by which we can achieve that in Java and in many programming language is through the use of variables. And one thing to note is that variables are different things in programming than they are in mathematics. In mathematics, we consider a variable to be a representation of a number that can take on some value, and that value may change. In programming, variables are specifically a chunk of memory. So what that means is a variable is just somewhere in the computer's memory that we can stick a piece of data in. And more importantly, it is a named chunk of memory. And so what happens is we tell our program, hey, we need a place to store a string, or hey, we need a place to store an integer, and I want to call that by this name. And what Java will do is it'll say, okay, I've set aside this little piece of memory that can hold a number, and when you use this name, you can get to it. So for example, if we want to say, hey, I want a variable to hold a string, we start by saying, okay, there's going to be a variable that is a string, and that string variable is going to hold a name in it. And we can define that just like this. So line 46 here says, hey Java, give me a variable that will hold a string, and I want that variable to be called name. And what this line is doing is it is declaring a variable. And so line 48 says, hey Java, give me a place to store a string and call it name. And in addition to declaring a variable, we can assign to a variable. And my name is Drew, so I'm going to say name equals Drew. And so what this line is doing is it's saying, hey Java, remember that variable I asked for that I called name? I want you to stick this value in there and hold on to it for me. And so we call this process assignment. And in Java, we use the equals sign just by itself to be assignment. And the first time I read this, I read it as equals, but that's not really a good way to do it. A better way to do it would be to read it as name gets Drew. Because what that's saying is take the value here and put it in this variable. All right, so that is one way of working with variables. You can declare a variable, and then you can put a value in the variable. Sometimes you want to do things that way. There are times when you'll want to declare the variable in one place and put a value in it in another place, just like we've done here. But a better way, whenever possible, is to do both at the same time. So you are going to declare and assign together. And you can do it in just one line by taking both parts and putting them together. Now notice when I declared a variable, that was a statement, so it had a semicolon. when I assigned to a variable, that was a statement, so it had a semicolon. And when I declared and assigned together, that was also a statement and had a semicolon. So that's kind of how we get started with, declaring and assigning variables. And one more note is that the first time you assign to a variable, we say that we are initializing. So that's the first time we assign to a variable. And the reason that's important is when you declare variables, like we did on line 48 here, we just declared it. We don't, in a lot of cases, have a guarantee as to what's going to be in the variable. Now, a language like Java, it's pretty predictable. String has a special value in there that we'll talk about later. Integers tend to use 0. Doubles will also use 0. So in some languages, it's pretty consistent. Now, in other languages like the early days of C, there would be some unpredictability as to what value actually got stored in the variable when you declared it. And so for that reason, we tend to go with that practice today, that we want to assign when we declare so that there is some known value in there. But again, in Java, it's pretty predictable what's going to be in there. It's just a good habit to get in. So that's kind of the first steps of variables, and we'll move on from there. Now, there are some limitations to be aware of with variables. Notice how we started here by saying that our variable is going to be a string. Java enforces that contract very rigidly. And what that means is, if I say the variable is going to be a string, I can't put a number in there, like the number 2. Java will tell me that there's a type mismatch and that it can't convert an int into a string. Now, if I wanted to put a 2 in there, I could by doing the string 2. And so that's one way to kind of play with that. And if I try to do a char, it's not going to like that either. So I can't do a char into a string because a char is not a string. But if I want to do a string, I can do that. And so one thing to note is that variables are type specific. You can't say it's going to be one type and give it a value of a different type. Within reason, there are ways to convert some types to other types, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're looking at right here. So we have that. It's also important that when you give your variables names, that they have meaningful names. So in this case, because I know that this variable is going to hold a person's name, I called it name. Now, if I wanted to give it some other kind of value, like let's say we're looking at a person's birth month. Well, I can use multiple words in a name, but there are conventions we need to follow. So when you're writing a variable name, you can use the letters A to Z, the lowercase letters a to z, the numbers 0 through 9, and the underscore symbol. So all of these are valid symbols to put in a variable name, and they cannot start with a number. All right, so a variable like age, I could call it age, I could call it underscore age, I could call it age 2023, I could call it underscore 2023 age. All of those are valid, but if I try to name it something like 2023 age, it's going to be upset because you can't start a variable name with a number. Another thing is convention. So when you have multiple words in a variable name, there are no strictly enforced rules in Java other than the ones we've really gone over. But by convention, we prefer what's called camel case. And camel case is where you just take each word, put it in all lowercase, and then every word after the first word should start with a capital letter. So in this case, the string is representing a birth month. So it could be October, it could be May, it could be June. And so when I do that in Java, the way I prefer to name it is birth, the first word, is all lowercase, and then every word after the first word, the first letter gets capitalized. And so that's called camel case, and that is just one convention that tends to be preferred here. Now, when you're working with variables, we want to go back to looking at how we print. So we were printing before, system.out.println with the print functions. So before, we would print like this, and we just give it the string. One of the things we can do with variables is we can just give it the name of the variable. So I've already created two variables, so I'll create two lines, and we'll say we have name and birth month. And so when it's written like this, we're not going to print the name of the variable. We're going to print the value that is in the variable. So when I execute this now, it's going to print Drew here and then June here. So let's say we're just looking at the name now. So we're going to move this up, put it here. And to show you the difference, we'll look at this. So these two lines, line 57 and line 58, look very similar. But the difference is line 58 is taking a string that contains the word name and printing that. So it's not printing a variable, it's just printing the raw text. Line 57 is not printing the same thing. It is saying, hey, there's a variable who's called name in here somewhere. Let me go to that variable and look at what's in it and print that. So when I print these two lines, the first one prints Drew because Drew is what I stored in the name variable, and line 57 is printing the variable or the value within the variable. But line 58 is printing the word name because I gave it a string. And so when you're looking at the differences, if it's between two quotes, like here on line 58, that is raw text, a raw string value. If you don't see quotes, that means that you're printing a variable most likely, and Java is fetching the value that you stored in that variable. And so something you can do here is you can actually change the value in name after you print it. So on line 56, I'm storing Drew in name and then printing it. Line 58, I'm saying, okay, forget what you had in there before, store this new value of Bob in there. And now I'm going to say we're going to print the same variable. So line 57, I'm printing name, and line 59, I'm printing name, but between those two lines, I'm changing the value that's in name. So once you are doing a new assignment, that name variable forgets what was in there before. And the reason that Drew still gets printed is the program runs sequentially. That means it's going to go one line after the other. So first it says print what's in there, then change it, then print what's in there. And so when I look at the output, I see, okay, it printed what was in there. Then after it changed it, it printed what was in there. And so on this line, when it gets to line 61, it has no idea what was in there before. It just knows what's in there right now. And so this is one of the benefits of variables, is that you can store a value, do something with it, change the value, and then do something with that new value. And this println function doesn't care what's in the variable. It just knows I need to go and get what is in the variable so I can do something with it. Doesn't matter what's in there. So that's one of the benefits of working with variables, and one of the distinctions between using the name of the variable or what the variable is called and getting the text that is in the variable. Because notice, we'll do the same demonstration this time, If I print on line 59 the variable name, and then on the next line the string name, and do the same thing on 62 and 63, we'll see that we get Drew, which was stored in the variable, the raw text name, Bob, which was stored in the variable, and then the raw text name. So between line 59 and line 62, the value of name changed, but in 60 and 63, that string is the exact same string, so that's what got printed. So notice that this text has nothing really to do with this variable. They just so happen to be called the same thing. One is a variable, one is a string. For the variable, the print function is going to the variable and getting the value inside it, because remember, a variable is just a little place in memory where data sits. And in the case of this raw string, it's just spitting out exactly what was put into it. So that's kind of a little bit more on working with variables and how we can use them in printing. And just as a brief recap, we can look at the different types of variables. So we've already looked at strings. So we've got a month, January, for example. That's one type of variable we can create. If we want to create a variable to hold a character or a piece of data like that, we can say char letter, and we can stick the letter A in there. If we want to work with a number, an integer, let's say, we can say int, and we'll call it an age, and we'll set that equal to 20. We also have our real numbers, which are doubles in most cases, and we'll make a simple one here. Let's say that we want our double to be pi, and we'll say it's 3.14. And then, of course, we have our Boolean, and we'll just call our Boolean something like is Java, and a Boolean is a true-false value, and we'll say that that's true. And so in these cases, when we do our system.out.println, we'll just stick one after each variable so that we have those. And we'll print month, letter, age, pi, and is Java. So again, we're printing the variable, which means, hey, don't print the name of this variable, go look it up and print what's in it. So that when I run this program, January, then A, then 20, then 3.14, then true, which is the same order that I created them here. And so different types of variables behave the same way here. We're looking it up, printing the value, and this works exactly as it would have if, say, we had just done, and I'll just do the last one to demonstrate here, if I had given it the raw value instead. And so notice 2 trues got printed. The first case it's looking it up in the variable. The second case it's using the raw value that was provided to it. And another note here is that when we start talking about these raw values, the term we most often use to apply those are called literals. So true is a Boolean literal. January would be a string literal. So in this case, the println is taking the Boolean literal true. In line 79, it's taking the Boolean variable is Java. And so the print line and the other print functions can handle variables and can handle the literal values in exactly the same way. It's just that in one case, we have a little bit more flexibility because I could change this later. Let's say that I changed is Java to false because I felt like it. And then I run that again. I get true the first time and false the second time. That's because they execute the lines in order. So we start off with is Java is true, print is Java, which we set to true, changes Java to false, then print again. And so in the first line, it prints true because it was true the last time it was changed. And then line 81, it prints false because that's when it was changed last as well. So all of your data types that we've covered so far work as variables or they work as literals. It doesn't matter. The last thing to kind of note at this point is that you do have the ability to create a variable without giving it a type in Java. And you do that with the word var. And when you use var, Java is going to predict or guess the type. So in this case, I used an integer and I hover over and Java figured out that it was an int. In this case, I used a real, hover over, Java figured out it was a double. I used a Boolean value, Java figured that out. I used a char, Java figured that out. I used a string, only one letter, Java still figured out it was a string. So var is a way to implicitly type your variable, which just means Java will assign the type for you. For now, I would recommend avoiding this pattern just because until you get really comfortable with the different types of variables and how you use them, it can get a little confusing for Java to just pick the variable type for you. It's a little bit better to get used to this notation of choosing the variable type when you need it, but it is important to know this if you come across it.